Blue Jays fans, and welcome to Sunny Side of the Dome. I'm your host, Karen Soutar, and I'm here to talk some Blue Jays baseball with you for the next half an hour or so, give or take. And Sunny Side of the Dome is brought to you by Jays from the Couch. We stream live Thursday evenings at 6 p.m., and you can find us on Jays from the Couch's Facebook page, Twitter page, or YouTube channel. And if you are following along live and you think of a question or comment, please do send it on in. I love that listener interaction. I think it makes the show that much better. If you don't catch the live version and you still want to check us out, no problem. When you're ready for us, we're ready for you. You can catch the archive version on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube page, or you can download as a radio podcast. So lots of different ways to access us. Great to have that reach. And if you like the content here at Sunny Side of the Dome, be sure to check out the regular podcast, which is Monday evenings, hosted by Shaun Doyle, senior editor, founder of Jays from the Couch. It's always got lots of good stuff to share. And the other show is the On Fact Circle, Tuesdays at 6 p.m., hosted by Steve Feck, my Jays from the Couch colleague, with lots of different experience and thoughts, and entertaining, informative, sometimes drive you crazy if you're anything like me, but definitely worth checking out. So if you haven't been, hope you start to do so. Well, not completely sure what to say. Hello, Blue Jays fans. What a difference a week makes. Just 7 days ago, we were sitting here together in anticipation of the Blue Jays' first playoff games in Toronto in 6 years, since 2016. And I don't know about you, but I was excited. I was really expecting a much deeper run than what we got. And it's, yeah. I mean, I'll definitely get into that, because how can you not? It was such a disappointment. I was really expecting more, even if this wasn't necessarily the year that they were going to win a World Series. I thought they had put together a team that was capable of a deep run, a team that had really found their stride later in the season. And yeah, it was a surprise to me, but we'll get to that. So basically, I'm not going to try to go into transactions this week, because really, I mean, what is there to say? Transactions are frozen. Nate Pearson is pitching in the Dominican League, in the Dominican Winter League. So something for us to keep an eye on, fingers crossed. The more he's around, without being able to stay healthy and actually pitch well and get guys out in Major League Baseball, the more, unfortunately, I lose enthusiasm for him. But I mean, he's still got an amazing arm. So, you know, if you're anything like me, maybe you'll be keeping an eye on what goes on in the Dominican Winter League, how he does, and see if he can get back to being healthy, and maybe he can contribute to the Blue Jays next season. We'll see. There's always hope. Hi, Matt. Evening, Karen. I'm still on the anger side of the grief curve. Talk me down, please. Yeah. I mean, it's hard, because I'm kind of there too. I'm really upset. I don't know about you or anybody else who might be tuning in. When something not happy happens in my life, one of the coping mechanisms that I use is music, and I'll kind of zero in on 2 or 3 sad songs and play them over and over again. And for some reason, it helps me get through it. But then the downside is, once I've gotten past the worst of whatever it is, I can't really listen to that song again, because it takes me back there. Just a little tidbit from me. So, yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I bet a lot of us Jays fans are too. I'm frustrated. I'm sad. I'm angry. I mean, it's one thing if all of that series was played in a way that I thought was above board. But I thought the Mariners, honestly, they did a few things that series that I am not impressed with. If they were really the better team and they had just won by being the better team and not doing anything questionable, then that would have been one thing. But I'm not happy. So I am very much cheering for the Astros to eliminate the Mariners. And last I saw, the Astros were leading 3-2. Hooray. So but yeah, just a little preview of what I am going to get into, because watching the game, I went to both games. I was lucky enough, I think, to go to both games. I mean, it is a privilege. I never want to take it for granted, especially after COVID and the team not even being allowed in Canada for a year and a half and all of that. But I was very, very disappointed by that series and the way their season ended. For myself, that disappointment was mitigated somewhat by my belief in their future. I still think that they have a very bright future. I'm really looking forward to next year. I can't wait for them to start, and I believe they're going to make upgrades, but that has yet to be seen. So we'll see what happens in the winter. Anyway, so yeah, there aren't really many transactions to talk about. I mean, we know who ultimately made the roster, and that didn't last very long. Who knows? I mean, on the way home from game one, of course, they were talking a lot about Luis Castillo and what a good job he did, him throwing high 90s and all of that. I don't know if he touched 100 at all, but yeah, he was, maybe he did. Anyway, yeah, he was up there with velocity, and on the radio show they were saying that statistically the Blue Jays position player who has had the best success and results in his career hitting against high velocity, can you guess? It's Lourdes Gurriel Jr. So him still being injured and not being well enough to make the playoff roster, might that have made a difference? I mean, we'll never really know. The Blue Jays did have their chances against Castillo, but unfortunately couldn't string enough of them together to get any runs. But anyway, we'll get to that. So the Blue Jays season in review: good, bad, and then in the future, I think some good again. So the good, they were an up and down season. They had an up and down season, but ultimately they had a record of 92-70. That's darn good. It was good enough to be the first wild card, and it's not like they just won it by one game. Well, they won it by 2 games over the Seattle Mariners and 6 games over the Tampa Bay Rays. The Toronto Blue Jays have had a 46-year history. They started playing in 1977. So how many times in those 46 years do you think they managed to do better than 92 wins in one season? Anybody know the answer? The answer is 5 times. So their best season in terms of a regular season win-loss record had 99 wins, and that's in 1985. They came close to that again in 1987. They were at 96. The first year that they won the World Series in 1992, they also won 96 games in the regular season. Just a little bit less than that in 1993 when they won 95 games, but they got in and as we all know, won back-to-back World Series. And then 2015, I'm sure anybody who's been a fan since back to 2015, I'm sure you remember that team and just how absolutely hot they looked down the stretch. The 2015 Blue Jays had 93 wins. That's only one more win than this season's version. Now, that was a completely different team. They were a 500 team at the deadline, and a few trades were made that were needed to fill some holes, and they just took off and had a fantastic season. But before we get too caught up and too carried away and forget to appreciate the good season that the Toronto Blue Jays had in 2022, keep that in mind because in 46 years, this is the sixth best regular season record that the Blue Jays have ever managed. They've got a very good team. As everybody knows, they started off the season with Charlie Montoyo as the manager, and excuse me, no, he didn't pitch. Maybe if he had, they would have done better some of the time. He managed for 88 games, so a little bit more than half of the way. And under him, they had a record of 46 and 42. So not what the team was hyped to have in the offseason, not what a lot of Blue Jays fans expected, I'm sure. And even though they were in a playoff spot, when Montoyo was let go, he was let go. And in fact, they had been in a playoff spot pretty much the entire season. And at the time, I really thought it was odd. I know there's a number of Blue Jays fans, some who I follow on Twitter, who really didn't think Montoyo was a good strategic manager. And I thought so at the time, and at first I really questioned the firing. But I have to admit, John Schneider, he has taken the team to next level when compared to Charlie Montoyo. Under John Schneider, the Blue Jays had a record of 46 wins and 28 losses. That is a winning percentage of 622. And had they played at that pace for the entire season, that would have been 101 wins. That would have been the most that they've ever had in their history. It would have been second in the American League, only to the Houston Astros. They would have won the AL East division. So, yeah, I think just on that point alone, that I'm really hoping soon that they drop the interim part of John Schneider's title, because he's currently interim manager, or I'm not even sure how that works at this point, if he's currently under contract to the Blue Jays or what. But I saw Ross Atkins' end of season press conference, and he's good at talking a lot and not actually saying all that much. But as of now, John Schneider has not been named manager, nor has anybody else. He was quick to praise John Schneider and say, well, we think it would be very hard to get somebody better than him. Not sure what's going on. Hopefully there's talks behind the scenes, and really hope they come to terms soon and make him manager, and drop that interim stuff, and have a little bit of stability for the team going forward, and so forth. And excuse me just a moment. So yes, so that was the regular season. They certainly had their ups and downs. They were they were so hot and cold. When they were hot, it seemed like they could beat anybody, and when they were cold, it seemed like just about anybody could beat them. But yeah, it was exciting. It was a roller coaster ride. And from the middle of August, from August 18th, all the way through the end of the season on October 5th, the Blue Jays only lost 2 series. So they were winning most of those series. They split a couple of series, a 2-game series against the Phillies and a 4-game series against the Rays at the Trop, where they've historically had nightmares and had a hard time getting anything going down there. But as I said, I really think they found their stride under John Schneider and in that last month and a half of the season. So that was the regular season. I think if we're Blue Jays fans, we have a lot to be happy about and proud of. So they got to the postseason. They had their celebration. They had a few days to get things sorted out as far as they're playing at home and who their opponent was and all of that. And then it was just getting ready for that series. So game 1, that they had Alek Manoah, all-star. Absolutely, he's become an ace pitcher. And I really expected him to be lights out in that game. I mean, he was American League Pitcher of the Month for September. He had an ERA of 0.88. Like that's just Unbelievable. It seems like every time I think Manoa, I think we've seen what he's got. He just shows us something else, whether it's on the field, off the field. And of course, there was the comment about pressure is something for your tires. If people asked him if he was going to be feeling the pressure in his first Major League Baseball playoff start, well, that first game, that game number one, I don't want to try to claim that I know how he was feeling, what was going on in his head. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, he was definitely nervous. Maybe it was more along the lines of adrenaline, because that you can't tell me that the fact that it was his first Major League Baseball postseason appearance and the result that we saw, you can't tell me that those things aren't correlated. I think maybe he was overthrowing. I think he kind of slid back because the Manoa we first saw when he came up in May of last year and pretty much through much of the year, and even some of this year, he was someone that sometimes balls would get away from him and he would end up hitting batters. I remember thinking that, I wish he's a really good pitcher. I wish he could get a little bit better strike zone command and not hit batters. And for a while there, he got away from doing that. And he got back to that, unfortunately, in that game one. I believe that having that experience under his belt, not only for him, but for a lot of the Blue Jays teammates, will serve them very well in the future. I have no doubt whatsoever that they're getting back to the playoffs probably as soon as next year. And it's really going to help that they've been there, and they're going to we're going to see better than that. Certainly at least one win, and I think they're going to go deeper into the playoffs. So maybe if last year was the trailer, maybe this was the dress rehearsal. Maybe the show is actually next year, or maybe next year is the sequel. I don't know how you want to look at it, but yeah, it's very unfortunate. And to me, I really see a domino effect where the fact that Manoa, if he was his usual dominant self, they do let him go a little bit deeper into games, into the sixth, into the seventh, whatever. I mean, he's been out there at times challenging for a complete game, and they wouldn't let him do it. But I think if he were pitching as well as he normally does, he would have gone deeper in the game. They wouldn't have had to use 5 relief pitchers to finish off game one. And those pitchers who did not allow any Seattle runs in game one, maybe they would have been that much sharper to pitch game two. Because in game two, as we know, it was the exact opposite. Kevin Gausman, the starter, did great. And even though he was taken out of the game also in the sixth inning, I mean, he took a no-hitter into the fifth, partly because of some really good defense behind him. And yeah, the wheels just fell off. The bullpen, I believe, was gassed, and not just because a lot of them pitched the day before. I think a big part of what happened during the season is they really never had a fifth starter. Between Hyun-Jin Ryu, Yusei Kikuchi, and Mitch White, they never got anybody who could go out there every 5 games and at least give them something consistent and keep them in games. So by design or not by design, the Blue Jays had a lot of bullpen days during the regular season. So the other starters, along with the position players, they were good enough to get them to the playoffs. But I think a lot of the relief pitchers were burnt out by the end of the season, and it just wasn't a good formula. I mean, some of it was rather fluky, but when a team is good enough to jump out to an 8-1 lead, they really should win most of the time. And the Blue Jays had been winning those games, and lousy time for them to find one that they couldn't close out. But that was that, unfortunately, and so goes this particular group's really first shot at Major League Baseball playoffs. I mean, some of them won together, With the Fisher Cats back in 2018. They won a championship. That's the Double A team before a number of these guys made the major leagues. And then back then, Alec Manoah was still pitching in college. They've signed a few free agents with them. Some of them have postseason experience with other teams and so forth. And then, of course, there was 2020 where a lot of those guys were around, but not all of them. And it was very unique because they had to play in an empty stadium. So it's not nearly the same as having a very loud crowd. When you when you give them something to be loud about, then they're loud. And having that, the adrenaline and being able to feed off the crowd and all of that. So lots of different things there. Yeah, I mean it's so hard to move past it, but at the time, and there were people who asked me how I felt after that game was over and their season was over, and I said honestly, I'm heartbroken, but the one thing that is really keeping me from falling apart inside is I strongly believe in their future. When the 2016 season ended and the Blue Jays were eliminated 4 games to 1, I think it was, against Cleveland in the ALCS that year, I was very sad about it, and it was a very different sort of feeling because not only was their season over, but there was a voice inside my head, so to speak, that said to me, this team is no longer on the way up. They're on the way down. I mean, they looked to me, they went toe to toe against Kansas City the year before in 2015. In 2016, they really didn't even look to me to be in the same league as that Cleveland team that did end up going on to the World Series and taking it to 7 games before the Chicago Cubs ultimately won. And it felt like the end of that ride because in Major League Baseball terms, a lot of their players were old, and some of them, like, they were getting close to the end of their careers as far as being good Major League Baseball players. And ultimately, the Blue Jays, they kind of spun their wheels for 2 years in 2017 and 2018, trying to get back to the glory days, and it didn't work. Ultimately, in 2019, they decided correctly that it was time to pull the plug and start over with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette and several rookies, some of whom are no longer with the team anymore. But some of them are, and I think most of the ones that they've kept have turned out to be very, very good. They've also made some really good ads for the most part. You say Kikuchi, what a head scratcher. But yeah, I mean, he was taken out of the rotation. As we all know, he actually looked a lot better late in the season with the Blue Jays as a bullpen piece. So who knows, maybe that'll ultimately be where he's used for the next 2 years. Some people have compared him to Andrew Miller. Remember him? And speaking of the 2016 ALCS, if you say Kikuchi can be Andrew Miller 2.0, that the Blue Jays might actually have something there. And now they just need a couple of starting pitchers. Most of the guys will be back unless the Blue Jays choose to trade or DFA them. The only players that are eligible for free agency, the big one is Ross Stripling. The others are David Phelps and Jackie Bradley Jr. So I'm sure we'll all be watching carefully in the offseason, see what happens with those guys, particularly Stripling. I don't know if the Blue Jays and Stripling can come to terms where he comes back later. I really hope he does, but who knows? Apparently, one comment he's made, because he's out there in the media, on the radio. Apparently, he does podcasts with Mike Wilner. Not that I've listened to one. Maybe I should, but apparently he has commented on how much the opportunity to be with the Blue Jays and pitch into this playoff run and make a significant contribution has meant to him. And for context, for anybody who doesn't know, although a lot of people probably do. The Blue Jays got Ross Stripling in a trade with the LA Dodgers. The LA Dodgers are pretty much perennial contenders, but if you know the way that their roster is built, basically they have superstar players from top to bottom. They throw money around, they sign many of the best established players, or they trade for them like they did with Mookie Betts. And Ross Stripling, coming into his own as an MLB pitcher, he had a role on those teams, but he wasn't really a starting pitcher. He was more of a swingman. If somebody, for example, went on the injured list, maybe he would be the one to take their spot in the rotation and take a few starts. But then as soon as the Clayton Kershaw or whoever was ready to come back, Ross Stripling had to step aside, whether he went back to long relief or whatever it was. So he apparently really appreciated having a significant role on a contending team. So how big a deal is that to him when he makes his decision as far as where to go in free agency? Would that be enough to bring him back to the Toronto Blue Jays, assuming that they make him a good offer? Is he going to end up going somewhere else? Will somewhere else offer more money? I mean, who knows? I'm not inside his head. It's been great having him the last 2.5 years, and all the best to him wherever he ends up, but I really hope he ends up back with us. So anyway, we are almost out of time for today, and I do want to do another Through Blue Jays Colored Glasses to finish off this season. So the good, the bad, the ugly, we saw a little bit of each during this season. I really do think that it's been progress, and I really have to give kudos, honestly, to everybody who participated. And I know there are lots of people who don't like this front office, who don't like Ross Atkins as a general manager, but look at the facts. Back in 2019, that's only 3 years ago, the Blue Jays had 57 wins, 95 losses. They were pushing the possibility of a 100-loss season. And in 3 short years, they have 92 wins, 70 losses, and they're back in the playoffs. They're actually back in the playoffs for the second time in 3 years. But I really appreciate the progress that they've made, the relatively quick turnaround. I mean, you look at a team like, no disrespect if there's any Orioles fans out there, but the Baltimore Orioles, since they and the Blue Jays last met in the playoffs in the 2016 wild card game, back when it was only 1 game, since then the Orioles really haven't had many good seasons. They've been losing year after year after year, and it was only this season, after they got a very high draft pick in Adley Rutschman and some other good draft picks, that they managed to put together a team that once again looks respectable, that you don't just look at on your calendar when your team is going to face them and say, oh, it's the Orioles. We should have a good season there, or a good series there, excuse me. The Orioles have made it back to respectability, and congratulations to them and all the best. The Toronto Blue Jays did it in a much shorter time period. Or, I mean, we could be the Anaheim Angels. We could have, the Angels, they do spend money. They have 2 of the better players in the American League, in Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, and they've gone out there and they've tried to augment that team. They do sign free agents and so forth, but for whatever reason, and I don't really understand what it is, Mike Trout has made the playoffs once in his career, and he didn't advance. The team did not get out of the first round, and that was that. I am very, very appreciative of this Toronto Blue Jays team from top to bottom, from what everybody has done to get it to the point where it is today. Having said that, I really do think that the best is yet to come for them. I'm looking forward so much to next year, I don't think we're going to see the exact same group. I think a lot of these guys are going to be back, but I also think that they're going to augment. And there's ways to do that. There's internally, there's minor league prospects that could get promoted. They could sign a free agent or two. I'm not necessarily thinking that they'll sign the most expensive free agent on the market, but there are guys that they could go out and augment. Find another Jimmy Garcia out there, an under the radar sort of pickup for the bullpen that could improve them, because that's one place that they could improve overall. And then there's the possibility of trades. And there's, of course, this time of year, all kinds of speculation out there, and about who might or might not be traded. Myself, I like to kind of wait and see what happens. I don't want to get too up or too down about the possibility of a trade that might not even ever happen, but I'll definitely be keeping a close eye on it. I'm sure a lot of you will be too. And yeah, 2023, we have a trip to spring training already booked. And for those of you who don't know the story, we went to Florida this past March. It was a trip that we booked the previous fall, knowing that there was a possibility of a work stoppage. So we went down there for a week, and the Blue Jays actually played after the lockout, and after they got a late start to spring training, they actually played their first spring training game on the day that we came back to Toronto from Florida. So, oh well, comedy of errors, a little like that last game was, but got an interesting story to tell somewhat. But at least this year in 2023, this coming year, we're going to spring training, and we'll be going to a number of games. And I think having a full spring training, having the opportunity to stretch out the starting pitchers, I just really feel that as good as the 2022 season was, we haven't seen the best that this group has yet to offer. A lot more is going to go right for them. A lot less is going to be wrong. And in about a year from now, we will have some playoff wins to talk about and celebrate together. In the meantime, hang in there. And yeah, I guess that's about it for this week. So thank you as always for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And go Blue Jays in 2023.